Hello and welcome to Let's Review. In the past, I have made no secret of my enjoyment of the game FTL. It's a fantastic little game, and frankly I figured it was time to give it a proper review. Now I'll be honest, this review is less about me deciding whether or not the game is good, and more me trumpeting why I like it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't worth watching. So, I think we should start, as we always do, with the gameplay. The gameplay of FTL is relatively simple to learn, but it's quite difficult to master, and that begins with your navigation of the galaxy.
The map screen of FTL is relatively straightforward. This is the current location of our ship. This threatening looking area is the area that the Rebel fleet has covered. If I was to attempt to jump back to one of these sectors, I would find myself getting very badly beaten by some very powerful ships. Now it's entirely possible to defeat those ships, but each one is deliberately overpowered compared to everything else you will fight in that sector, so as a result they are very difficult fights. There's other things you can encounter, so for example, this area has a nebula in it. This will actually slow down the Rebel fleet. They normally cover twice this distance, but because I'm in a nebula, they only cover half that distance. I could also visit a store, which are extremely useful for buying upgrades and things like that. And if I had the long-range sensors upgrade, I would be able to detect what's at some of these various locations. By just hovering your mouse over, you can see the distance that you can travel. So if I was here, the only world in range would be this one. So from here, all of the potential places I can go, I have already been to. So instead, I'm now going to head to the next sector. Your ultimate objective for the game is to get from this initial sector right the way to this final sector. And to do it, you choose your path as you go. So I could go through this rock-controlled sector or the civilian sector. Once I've done that, I would have to go through one of these nebula sectors or this civilian sector. Now, since I'm not personally a fan of nebula sectors, I'm going to go for this civilian sector and then go up here and along here and over here. It's good to plan your route in advance, although you only know what the two closest sectors will be. So once I reach this civilian sector and reach the end of it, I'll be able to tell what this civilian sector is and what this nebula sector is, as there are a number of options for each. So this hostile area is rock controlled, but it could be rock homeworld, it could be mantis controlled, it could be rebel controlled, and so on and so forth. The green ones likewise are friendly, so that may mean Engis, that may mean Zoltan, that may mean a couple of other things. And as a result, you can usually take a reasonable guess what sort of things you're going to encounter there once you've played through the games enough time to start understanding these things. Jumping to a new sector is really straightforward. You just click the thing, and you'll always get a text box whenever you encounter a new area. And that can be anything from news that there is an enemy ship here, to simple you have arrived here, to somebody here wants assistance with something, and there's an awful lot of variety in those. If you pick up any missions along the way, which are usually minor quest lines, you will see them displayed on the map like so. So if I want to go to there, I'd have to hop to there, and then to there. The map is pretty straightforward, and you're not going to have a lot of idea what's going on in each area until you get there. If you had the long-range sensors upgrade, as I mentioned before, it will display potential hazards in an area, such as pulsars or solar flares, and it will also display whether or not there is a ship present there, and it usually means if there is a ship there, it is hostile. But other than that, it's a lot of random chance, and as such, you never really know what you're going to encounter until you actually encounter it. And fundamentally, that is it for the navigation system of FTL.
A lot of the navigation work really does involve a lot of guesswork, as you won't know what you're going to encounter. This is true even if you acquire the long-range sensors, which are one of the many upgrades that can be acquired for your ship. Now that leads us very neatly onto the next major aspect of the gameplay.
During each run of FTL, you're liable to run into several stores, like this one. It will have a number of things available, so there's generic resources such as your fuel, your missiles, and your drone parts. And it can also offer repairs to your ship, so for example if I hit the Fix All button, that has fully repaired my hull. I can also buy a number of upgrades, so for example if I wanted a crew teleporter, I could buy it, or a mind control, I could buy it. The same goes for various augmentations, which can equip 3 of them on one ship at one time. And again, these do various things, so for example this scrap recovery arm will cause me to collect more scrap every time I collect scrap. They will often also allow you to hire additional crew, or purchase additional weapons. So for example, I am going to purchase this flat cannon because I happen to find flat cannons to be very effective weapons. You can also sell things to them. So for example, I have this defensive scrambler, which disables enemy defensive drones, which is potentially useful, but if I wanted, I could ditch it and get 40 scrap for it. I can also directly upgrade my ship. This can be done at any time when you're not in danger, which means either in combat or near one of the hazards such as a sun that's sending out high damage solar flares. So for example, my obvious investment would be to increase the power of my shields. This is a very useful upgrade to get early on as it doubles your shield power. So if I put 2 additional points into the shields, I already had the additional reactor strength, so my shields have now doubled in strength. All of this allows you to create a very powerful ship as you go further through the game and you upgrade a lot of these elements. So for example, by the end of the game, you can have an extremely high chance to dodge if you upgrade your engines significantly. And you can also have an awful lot of weapon systems by upgrading the amount of power to your weapons. You have to upgrade your reactor in order to power all these things. There's also the subsystems section, which does not require its own power. It simply upgrades as you go. Each of these is useful in their own way. And fundamentally, that is it for the upgrade system. There's an awful lot of depth to it once you consider the sheer number of different options you can get. Purely because I know there's at least 20 or 30 different varieties of augmentation, and at least a dozen or so different rooms that you can acquire.
A lot of this will depend on luck. If you have a particularly good run and acquire particularly good weapons or particularly good items at stores, you really can become an absolutely unstoppable force of nature. If you have a bad run, you can end up criminally underpowered, completely unable to defend yourself in the late game, and you will just get horribly, horribly slaughtered. This leads us nicely on to probably the game's biggest gameplay element, the combat.
This is the combat system of FTL. From here, you can see our ship on the left and the enemy ship on the right. Now, I've currently got it paused, but so that I can demonstrate a few things. So the HUD for FTL is pretty straightforward. Up here we've got our hull, the amount of scrap we have, which is the currency of the game, the amount of fuel, the amount of missiles, as some weapons do use missiles, and the amount of drone parts. We also have our shield rating. And then we have our evasion chance, the amount of oxygen we have on board, a list of our crew, and some buttons that allow us to save the current positions and send them back to their current positions if we have them running around. This is also where our FTL drive charges. If you're not in combat, the drive will immediately charge. However, if you are in combat, it will charge slowly as you go on. Down here we have our power distribution. So I currently have 4 points of power in our shields, a single point in our engines, 1 powering our clone bay, 1 in our O2 generation, 1 in our hacking drones, and 1 in our lasers. Now, because I can only supply 1 power to our weapon systems at the moment, I currently have a flat cannon that is utterly useless until I can upgrade the ship to allow us to make good use of it. However, if I want it, I have a beam drone that I can activate. Certain ships have access to drones, and the ones that don't can purchase a drone bay to give them access to it. So I'm going to unpause this. Now, the enemy ship only has a single heavy laser. This actually means they are of no danger to us, as even if I was to disable our shields down to only a single point, that laser does not have the firepower to get through them. It will knock our shields down, but as you can see, our shields will regenerate before that weapon recharges. As such, I can fight this battle with pretty much impunity, and in fact you'll notice that my shields operation guy, who is here, has actually gained a little bit of skill with the shield system which he does every time he recharges them. So, now, since this enemy ship is completely at my mercy, even down to the fact that his defense drone has been disabled by one of our upgrades, I'm going to activate my own beam drone. Now, beam drones are completely worthless against enemy shields. However, if his shields should go down, that beam drone will start doing a lot of damage. Rather than use my weapons, I'm going to use a hacking drone. This is a special subsystem you can get that attaches a drone here. Now that doesn't do anything until you activate it, like so. And you'll notice his shields drain away. That will stay active for a fairly short amount of time, but it was enough to allow the beam drone to do some damage. And in fact, it looks like the beam drone started a fire as that continued to take damage even after the beam drone had stopped firing. So I'm now going to use my lasers and I'm going to target the shield generators. Now, as you can see, they currently have a shield generator with 3 points in it. This doesn't allow them to get any stronger shields, but it does allow their shield generator to take a little bit more damage before their shields go down. So I'm going to activate my hacking drone again to disable their shields, and this time I'm going to put 2 points of damage into it. Now, an enemy ship attempting to run is one of the most common things it can do, so it's currently powering its FTL drive to try and escape. However, given that it's now lost its shields, and it's taken significant damage, the odds of it actually managing to escape are very, very low. In fact, I'm willing to bet the next couple of bursts from the drone will probably kill it. Yeah, it has 1 hull point left, and there it goes. After each battle, you'll get an amount of scrap, and usually another item or 2 as well. So what I'm going to do now is transfer the power back to the shields, as having rank 2 shields is very useful, especially early on, as most of the enemies you'll encounter won't have the firepower to get through them. And that was a fairly basic example of the combat of FTL. It gets a little more complex as you go throughout and you acquire different upgrades and systems, as well as needing to use multiple weapons in conjunction with each other. But fundamentally, that is it for the combat.
The combat system really does exemplify what I said earlier. It's very simple to learn, but it's very difficult to truly master. The whole thing really is a balancing act. Where do you put your available power? Do you want to charge up all your weapons so that you can fire them simultaneously and let off an unstoppable barrage? Or do you need to fire off one battery earlier than the others in the hopes of disabling an enemy system, such as their own weapons bay? At the end of the day, the combat for FTL really is excellent, and it's the main reason why this game is worth playing. However, the question is, why are you actually fighting all these space battles? Well, the answer to that, of course, comes in the story. The story follows a single small ship fleeing the advance of the rebel fleet. On board is information critical to the survival of the Federation. Information about a weakness in the enemy fleet that can be used in order to defeat them. From that initial setup, you basically write the rest of the story yourself. I didn't think that you were usually partial to that sort of thing. Usually I'm not, but I'll be honest, there's not really a lot to the main story here. Most of the interesting narrative stuff actually comes from these small individual stories that you find in each system that you jump to. And I'll be honest, this is a game where it's actually very hard to be a good person.
How so?
Well, take for example an enemy ship that's offering to surrender. When they do this, they'll offer you some form of tribute to get you to stop shooting at them. This can take a variety of forms, but usually it's a bit of fuel, but a few drone parts, that sort of thing. And it'll usually also contain a little bit of scrap. Now, as I mentioned before, scrap is the currency of the game, and you'll get an awful lot more of it if you destroy the enemy ship. That means you won't get the tribute they offered, but it's usually a lot more beneficial for you in the long run.
Oh, don't tell me that it gives you evil points or something for doing that.
No, it won't be mentioned again. It's just that if you're anything like me, you'll be halfway through a run and then you'll suddenly realise, wow, I'm actually kind of a horrible person. The game will never punish you for doing it. It's simply a case of what you have to do to survive. And I actually really like that. It's kind of a very subtle way of introducing a fairly dark element to morality. Do you actually believe that that was the creator's intent? Probably not, but it's kind of fun to think about. Overall, the main story of FTL really is not going to set your world on fire, but ultimately, it does what it needs to do. It's a framework for the gameplay and nothing else. And to be fair, it does ramp up pretty well towards the end of each run when you actually go into your confrontation with the Rebel flagship. Overall, the main story of FTL isn't that great, but it is exactly what it wants to be. And honestly, I don't think we could really ask for any more than that. The art of FTL is really gorgeous in its own way. In particular, a lot of the ship designs are really unique and really pretty damn good. Because the art style is deliberately designed to be very pixelated and very stylized, it works really well and it does have its own unique look. And overall, I just have to compliment the art style. It works really well for what this game is trying to do. The graphics for FTL really are not that impressive, but to be honest, they don't need to be. Thanks to the fairly simplistic art style, the game doesn't need incredibly flashy graphics, and that's definitely to its benefit. As a result, it's barely a system drag, and the uncapped frame rate will run well into the hundreds if you've got a monitor capable of supporting it. Overall, the game isn't graphically impressive, but it doesn't have to be. It uses what it has extremely well, and we honestly couldn't ask for any more than that. The music for FTL is pretty good in its own way. Again, it's relatively simple, but in a way that really works for it. The sound effects likewise are pretty solid, although I'll admit that the missile sound effects are a little weedy. I'd have liked them to have a bit more punch to them. But overall, I can say I'm quite happy with the audio. It's solid, and it works pretty damn well for what it is. So, did I enjoy FTL? Does that have to be a question at this point? Of course I did. Should you buy it? Absolutely you should. FTL is one of those rare games where everything just worked exactly the way it should. Everything came together in a way that was as close to perfect as you could hope for. And frankly, it's a bloody miracle that it did. FTL really is one of those fairly unique games that you should check out, and I can wholeheartedly recommend it to pretty much everyone, especially given that, frankly, it's not that expensive, given how many hours you could well get out of it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm kind of curious to see if I can actually complete a run on hard. I'll see you later.